Hello and good Monday and welcome into Believe in Purdue, Purdue Athletics podcast on the Believe Network, also the Lounge Sports Network. I'm Sam Sprunger, and I promised you a new co-host this week, starting with Monday's reaction to the weekend games. We welcome in Grant Flora. Grant, thanks for taking this adventure with me.
Yeah, no problem. Looking forward to it. I'm Grant Flora, like Sam said. I'm a student here at Indiana Wesleyan University. I'm a sophomore. I study multimedia communications with an emphasis in sports media. So a huge opportunity, but I love Purdue basketball, have ever since I can remember. And if there's one thing I can do, it's talk Purdue basketball. And I'm looking forward to diving in and critiquing them, but also talking about all the good stuff as well.
Well, and the one thing Grant is also going to do is get better at the football aspect when we get into the football season as well. So he's going to be learning a little bit, but also yes, he can definitely talk about the Boilermaker hardwood, and that's what we're going to jump into right away. We got a couple of big wins. The Boilermakers extend their win streak. After they lost 3 out of 4, Grant, they hit that real rough patch there where they lost 3 out of 4. They've won 5 in a row now, but we're going to talk about the game on Thursday. And that one in particular stands out to me because it's a 68-50 win at Rutgers. And I need to correct myself from last week. I did say that Purdue lost there last year. Last year they actually won there by 1 point. Yeah, I remember it now. They won by 1, and but Jersey Mike's the 2 previous years. Jersey Mike's was a very difficult place for the number 1 Purdue Boilermakers to go to at that point, and so Grant, we with 68-50, Purdue did a lot of things well in this game against Rutgers. What did you, having looked at it and seen the game? What kind of was your big thing that stood out about the Boilermaker win in Piscataway?
Well, there were definitely multiple things, but I think the biggest thing that any diehard Purdue fan would notice was the turnover discrepancy.
Yes.
They only committed, I believe, was it 8 or 10 turnovers
8
in that game, and they forced 16. Yeah, it was 8, and it was, I think, 10 just today against Nebraska. So just 8 turnovers compared to 16 was huge because not only did they take care of the ball, but they forced turnovers, something that Purdue has not been known for these past few years. Their defense is a little more conservative. It works. It just doesn't force a lot of turnovers, but that was not the case on the road against a tough Rutgers team.
Well, and I made the statement before you came on last week. I did the preview of this, and I said that Purdue needs to start. I mean, they've done a heck of a lot better than what they started out in cleaning up their turnovers. They started out the season very bad in control and holding on to the ball. They especially when last year you're used to being able to dump it down to 7-4. He cures a lot of he masks a lot of issues. You know, when you've got 7-4 in the post, he masks a lot of issues. I'm not saying that they couldn't recover from it, but you don't know that you have those issues until he's no longer there. So the beginning of the season this year, Purdue really struggled with making wise decisions on holding on to the ball because it didn't get to go down to Zach Edey first and then come back out and get distributed elsewhere. Purdue just needed to learn, and they did. And they've started to come around, and they needed to, especially in Piscataway, not turn the ball over.
Right. And like you said, as soon as they got into trouble on the offensive end, they could just throw it right into Edey. Even if they weren't turning the ball over, if it gets into late shot clock situations, our last resort, let's just get it to Edey and let him go to work. Now what we're seeing is if it gets down to 5 seconds left in the shot clock, is Braden Smith at the top of the key or something like that, just dribbling around trying to take a tough 3. And that's not a turnover, but it's a bad shot that most times is going to result in a miss and a defensive rebound that leads to a break or some sort of opportunity for the opposing team.
And Dylan Harper held extremely low below his season average. He's still recovering from the illness that he had. I didn't doubt that he was going to play, but one of the other keys, And I even mentioned this to some people on social media of if Purdue can establish a presence at the rim, that's TKR, that's Braden Smith driving to the hoop, not necessarily getting easy buckets, but driving to the hoop to be able to draw defense in or and distribute, or he can take a shot and be present defensively. And if they can keep Bailey or Harper below their season average, they could win this by 20 points. Well, I almost got it right.
Yeah.
Harper was still kind of sick, recovering, but well enough to play. Only 6 points. He had 6 rebounds. Ace Bailey, he 17, 7. He got pretty much his, but they kept Harper under his average, and they walked away with a really big win in a place that has been a very difficult place to play in the past.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the matchups in this to me looks like a game where Ace Bailey could have really done a lot of damage to
Yeah.
Purdue. And like he definitely 17 points is not small, but compared to the 39 he dropped at IU, you look at those two games, home against Purdue, on the road at IU, and you look at the teams and you ask me which game is he going to drop 39, I'm going to say at home against Purdue, just because Purdue doesn't necessarily play with a lineup that necessarily features a guy that can guard him at the 4. It's PKR, who could get beaten off the dribble. It's Camden Heide or even Miles Colvin, who's just not going to have the height or the strength necessarily to deal with him.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what way you cut it, Bailey can really do a lot of damage. So to hold him to 17, especially when Harper only has 6, is still a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and Bailey, I mean, these two are super freshmen. They're absolutely super freshmen. There's a reason why Steve Peichel had the number 1 or number 2 recruiting class. It's because of these two guys alone. And but if you look at the totals, that was kind of all that you got. You had Acuff had 10 points, but other than Bailey and Acuff, nobody sniffed double digits. And that was the big thing with Purdue's success, was not letting somebody else blow up and replace what Harper normally does. And they held their serve. Braden Smith, he isn't just only good because Zach Edey. 14 assists. He only had, I do believe, 2 turnovers, 16 points. He had a great game, even though he wasn't the leading. He was tied for the leading scorer. TKR had 16 as well. But it just to me, Fletcher Lawyer with 13. One of the greatest passes behind his back for the 3 from Smith in that game. Braden Smith to me is solidifying a little bit more his place in consideration for Player of the Year this year in the Big Ten. He just is.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because his teammates have stepped up and been more consistent on nights when TKR and Fletcher Lawyer haven't been as good. Guys like CJ Cox, Jakari Harris have come in and have started to contribute more consistently. Yeah. But also, I think particularly with this game, it was interesting how Rutgers decided to defend Smith. They weren't going to give him drop coverage, which I think is very smart from Steve Peichel, because he's shown time and time again that Braden Smith will eat you alive if you play drop coverage. But what they did a lot of was just a simple 2-man game with TKR, where he'd set like a high ball screen and maybe didn't even always screen somebody, just almost like a fake screen, and then boom, he just slipped and Smith just got on the ball. He either made a nice little floater or something like that, or kicked it out to an open guy for 3. That action got them a lot of baskets, especially when Rutgers got some momentum going. Looked like they might be able to get back in the game. Mm-hmm. Purdue was able to respond that way.
Yeah, and wanted to chat about that is, even when it seemed like Rutgers might get something going and get back into it, Purdue never, the guys never let it get to that point. We've seen some times where this up to this point in this season where they've played really well, gotten a lead cushion, and kind of sat back almost. It almost seemed like they sat back and they lost some control of the game. Tonight or Thursday night, it didn't seem like ever there was a point that Rutgers was completely stealing control of that game back.
Yeah, I know. And like you said, in years past, even the best teams like last year and the year before, on the road, Purdue will go in. They might build up a 10, 15-point lead, something like that. They let other teams back into it. And it's driven me crazy as a fan. And just because you see it all the time, you're like, oh,
Yep.
they're up 15 now, but you just kind of expect them to lose it at some point. But so to see them respond this well on the road was a really big deal. It's going to say a lot going forward about how this team handles the tough grinds in the Big Ten and then the postseason. They're going to be able to have that response, that mental toughness that you need to succeed.
Well, and with Purdue being at 4 losses already, that's an unusual thing for us to the past 2 years to see. That we're only 13-4. Like, we're flabbergasted. I'm sorry, but at the time, Purdue improved to 12-4 with that win, 4-1 in the Big Ten over Rutgers. But like that 13-4. But like I've said, we have been trying to find an identity since the opening tip against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and we're finally starting to get to that point where that's who we are. That's who we see streaks of it, and then we're not really 100% sure. It's still going to take some more time, and the one thing that I've got to keep telling people is, we're probably going to see 7-8 losses on this overall record before the season's done, and that's okay because Purdue plays such a strong preseason or pre-conference season schedule that some losses are okay. Look at Tom Izzo. I mean, he's played in years past. He plays a murderer's row of a pre-conference season that. There's times that he's had 5-6 losses before he's entered the Big Ten. And then he gets to March and he's a 4 seed and people are picking him to go to the Final Four. Why? Because he's seasoned his team and they're ready for March. I think that's what we're going to see with Purdue this year is they might have 7-8 losses, but they're going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's a little unprecedented compared to these last couple years. But also we've seen, 2 or 3 starting lineup changes already this season, and it's not just one guy. It's like completely different configurations of players between starting Will Berg in the first game, I believe, or I guess it was Jacobson and then Will Berg. And then they decided to go small ball, which I thought was a good move at the time. TKR at the 5 with Heidi and Colvin in there. And now they've gone completely away from that with Caleb First at the 5 and CJ Cox entering the lineup, and that's worked really well. So, they're trying different things out, fixing the holes, and we've seen the latest and greatest the last few games.
And you got to remember, Matt Painter's still adjusting too. Like he like I said, 7-4 in the post and 305 in the post. It covers a lot of issues, and you don't even know their issues until that's not there anymore. So, let's move to the game on from Sunday. This one kind of surprised me. Not the fact that Purdue won, but the fact that the final score, the Purdue Boilermakers take down the Nebraska Cornhuskers 104-68. An absolute dismantling at Mackey before they head out to the Pacific Northwest for the next week. But Grant, this was a performance by the Boilermakers. CJ Cox paces the way for the Boilermakers. 23 points, 4 rebounds. Not bad for the freshman.
No, not at all. Almost another breakout performance for him. I mean, he had the flash against Alabama, and everybody was like, "Oh, this is it. Like CJ Cox is going to be great. He's that low recruit that Matt Painter took and is going to turn him into a star." And then he had some stretches where he was putting up goose eggs and just didn't seem to be doing a whole lot. But lately he's come along, and it really couldn't have been at a better time starting this Big Ten season again in the new year. And this performance, I think, really was an accurate representation of what he's been able to do last year.
Oh, yeah, Fletcher Lawyer coming in with 19, TKR with 15, Braden Smith, 8 points. But he had 14 assists. I mean, and that's the thing that I keep bringing up with Braden Smith is he's not just a scorer. And every time I've talked to him, he always makes sure to mention I've got that chip on my shoulder and I carry that with me. And it drives me to just absolutely obliterate my opponents. Because, only offered 2 Division I scholarships. Purdue and Gonzaga. He decided to go to Purdue, closer to home. But like, oh, he's a freshman. As a freshman, he always makes mistakes. He's always making mistakes in the high tension situations. Well, he that wasn't wrong, but then last year, he gets into a high tension situation and he makes the good decision. And I asked him about that after the Tennessee game. I said, you're only up 1, and in the past, the knock on you has been you make bad decisions in high tension situations. I said, at what point does that enter your mind? He says, it doesn't, except for it drives me to make sure that I make the right decision. He says, I carry it with me. Let him keep talking. I love that, because that tells you that he's never going to be satisfied with what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, he's been doubted ever since coming out of high school. I mean, he was, like you said, was not offered by a high major program outside of Purdue. Then comes in after his freshman season. The whole narrative is Purdue's backcourt isn't good enough to go deep in March. They proved that wrong by making it to the national championship game, and it's because their backcourt was good. It's not just because of Zach Edey, but Lawyer and Smith performed at a high level. Then this year, everybody's like, oh, they have no Zach Edey. Braden Smith's not going to be what everybody thinks he's going to be. He was only good because he had a 7'4" guy to pass to, and he's proved that wrong. So at this point, as a fan, I am just encouraging everybody to keep doubting Braden Smith, because the formula is perfect.
Please say he's no good. I forgot to add in, Miles Colvin also had 14 today. So Purdue had 4 in double digits. Then you had Braden Smith with 8 and 14 assists. So there's a lot going on there. But CJ Cox pacing the way. About CJ is an amazing thought about me, or for me, is Purdue didn't necessarily. Okay, I don't want to say they stumbled upon him, but he was offered to Harvard, Yale, all these Ivy League schools, and instead, I believe Purdue was the only one that came onto his radar. He chooses Purdue over these Ivy Leagues. Think about what he could have been in the Ivy Leagues if he would have decided to go there. Because if he's blowing up for 23-4 against Nebraska, who is not a bad team. The mayor, Fred Hoiberg, has got a decent roster. It's not loaded and I say loaded in perspective comparative to last year, but they've got Connor Segan. He transferred from Wisconsin. They've still got some pieces from last year. Rip Mast is not in. He's out for the year because he blew his knee out right near a few months ago. But Nebraska is not a pushover. They're with the loss. They're 12-4. So, but at no point did I think that Purdue would 19 3-pointers, which is an amazing amount of points or 3-pointers, even for a good shooting team like Purdue.
Yeah, 19 of 33, 57.6% from deep, and they made 19 of them. That's crazy. Obviously, at Mackey, being at home is certainly helpful. But you look at Cox and Lawyer combined for 10 of 13 from 3.
Right.
If that type of production keeps up, at least percentage-wise, it doesn't get much better than that when you have Braden Smith at the
well, when you've got those guys hitting, it makes Braden's job a lot easier.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think for Fletcher, he has been a lot more consistent this season. For CJ, I'd still like to be further convinced that he's going to be that consistent night in and night out, and it's not just when he's at home, and it's not just every other game, but that I can trust in every game when Braden Smith passes him the ball and he's wide open, there's a good chance he's going to make the shot. And I think we're getting there.
Yeah. He's hitting 50%, over 50%, or right at 50% of his 3-point shots. Lawyer is. Yeah. When you can almost bank on he's going to make just as many as he's going to miss, that's a really good percentage.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another note about CJ Cox, you mentioned how they kind of stumbled upon him. Matt Painter was recruiting a different player, went to this game, saw CJ Cox play, and decided to go with CJ Cox. And I think it speaks a lot to CJ Cox as a player and as a person for choosing Purdue, and also Purdue as a program, and the fact that CJ Cox chose them over, like you said, Harvard and Yale. It means he's going to value his education at Purdue, which is a huge staple for
and
Purdue's
he's smart
athletics
enough
programs.
to go there.
Right. And then he's he's also going to work hard to play at Purdue because by
Right.
choosing Purdue, he wanted to play, I would assume, at a high major level and compete. And so he's going to be a guy that's going to come out and play 100% every night to win the basketball.
I have the strong feeling, and this may be just me. I think you're at the age that you've only really known Matt Painter as the coach, right? I am at the age where I've only known two coaches, Gene Cady and Matt Painter. And I forgot what I was going to go with on this this trip, but this tangent. I forget where I was going, but I know exactly where I'm going with it now. It took me a second. I can remember when UConn was, they're the Cinderella, and now all of a sudden they're a blue blood in every sense of the fashion. They've built the program over the course of about 30 years into what it is now. Okay, Jim Calhoun, then into Kevin Ollie, whether or not people want to admit that he was a good coach enough. He won a national championship with UConn. But then you get to the Dan Hurley years. I can remember Gonzaga being exactly the same way. You're like, who's this Gonzaga team? And, their most well-known player of history is John Stockton. Yeah, Purdue's been around. Purdue's had some really good teams. Purdue's been around, has the most Big Ten championships, but I can honestly see kind of that pedigree of Purdue changing to where all of a sudden they're going to be competing year in and year out, and have some serious consideration for long runs in the tournament because of what Matt Painter's doing now. I really do think that we're on the precipice of somebody like C.J. Cox picking Purdue over other places because he can see that they're doing the right things, and they could be on the ground floor of becoming what Purdue is as a not a blue blood necessarily, full-fledged blue blood, but starting to get there. I really do think that.
Yeah, it's part of why Purdue doesn't lose players to the transfer portal all that often, and then they don't have to take players in. Because I think, people say, like, Purdue is not taking players out of the transfer portal. They're just going with their recruits. They're not going to do that. I think part of the reason is they don't have to replace guys that they lose.
Matt Painter doesn't go to the portal
culture
that often.
Yeah,
he just
yeah,
doesn't.
and I think it speaks a lot to that Purdue culture. They're going to get those type of guys. They're going to buy in. As a Purdue fan, I love it because, for one thing, I don't have to keep getting used to new faces on the roster. I can actually watch players that are going to be there for 4 years, and it makes me feel like I have a better connection to them, and actually know them a little bit. But also, it feeds into a culture that is a winning culture, and you see it on the court.
Well, and David Jenkins and Lance Jones, those are the two big transfer portal people that Matt's brought in the past 3 years, and that's it. I mean, that's it. They both played some good minutes and some big pieces into the last two Purdue teams, but they weren't like, oh my gosh! As soon as they signed, it wasn't like, oh, Purdue's got this now. He fills pieces. He uses it as supplements, not as the whole thing. And I think that's the smartest thing is you know what? We got to have somebody that's going to understand our Purdue culture. And if they're coming in with only 1 year of eligibility, we've got to have some smart people coming in. And that was one thing Matt did talk about when it came about Lance when we were recruiting him, he came in and said, I just want to win. What if you come in and you don't start? I just want to win. And that was the start of, okay, you're going to be a perfect fit here. David Jenkins is the same way. I mean, he came in and he ran the guy Smith and Lawyer needed 2 really good guards to their first 2 years, and they got great ones to do it. Now they didn't need one necessarily transferring in because you've got the guards coming in from this recruiting class, and I think that Lawyer and Smith are now the ones teaching them. And I think it's great.
Yeah, they're older, more experienced, and you look at Jenkins and Jones, and they filled, like you said, they filled holes that Purdue needed. Mm-hmm. And I think Lance Jones is one of the most underrated pieces of that team from last year that is no longer on the team this year. And you obviously Zach Edey takes the cake with that. Like obviously,
right.
Using him is the biggest impact on this team. But after that, people talk about like Mason Gillis, Ethan Morton, great players, brought a lot. I loved Mason Gillis. He was probably my favorite player outside of Zach Edey on the team last year. I would argue that Lance Jones, losing him was a bigger loss than Gillis because he was an extra ball handler who could help with the turnover situation. He could shoot and score, take people off the bounce, was a great personality. He played defense really, really well. All things that Purdue could really use this year alongside Lawyer.
Well, you're not at all wrong on that, but that leads us into the end of today's show. A really good conversation about what the Purdue Boilermakers have done lately, past couple of games, and then also kind of our feelings on where we're headed, because we look at the schedule. We go to the Pacific Northwest the rest of the week, and that right there is a test just for traveling. So Grant, thanks for your first one's done, so you can kind of have the jitters. If you had the jitters, it should be gone, because Wednesday comes around, we're talking Washington, and maybe looking a little bit further into what Oregon's going to look like as well, but definitely the Washington game on Wednesday. Any final thoughts?
Fun to watch Purdue win 4 games by an average of 23 points these last 2 weeks to open up Big Ten play in 2025.
Yeah, and
couldn't have been a better start.
Right now, they're sitting in technically second place, but it'll be third. They'd be called third place because the Mitten State is controlling the top portion of the conference. Michigan State and Michigan both 5-0. Tom Izzo's gotten the Spartans playing pretty well, and it's going to be one of those, when you've got the Spartans playing well, you're kind of got to watch out with what's going on.
Yeah, for sure.
So, okay, well, thanks everybody for tuning in to Believe in Purdue. You can find us on all social. Well, I'm sorry, you can find me and Grant on all social media platforms. Well, at least I think Grant's on the platform formerly known as Twitter. But right there at Sam Springer1 is where you can find me. Keep the conversation going. Let us know what you're thinking about the Purdue Boilermakers and what they. Whether we're right, wrong, indifferent, doesn't matter. Just keep the conversation going, and we'll see you on Wednesday.